Hi there. This is John Drew
Okay.
here from Elevated Planet, and today I am with Dr. Tia Kansara once again. How are you doing, Tia?
Oh, super well. And very excited about this interview. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I appreciate it because this is going out on our first ever live event. So this is
Yay!
quite a landmark event for us. Yay!
Yay!
And I'm really interested with what you've got to say because, you know, the Akash or the Akashic Records, as I know, like it is a point of real interest to me. It's something I've studied to an extent, but like with many things, this is such a vast area that I've never focused on it enough to kind of really get to the end result. So I'm really fascinated because, you know, I know that this is part of your life, right? That's the way I see it. So, Tia, I wonder if you could just give us a sense of what the Akash is all about to you. What does it mean to you? How did you discover it? How do you get there? What do you get out of it?
Really good question. So we might have to split these up because I think
Oh
I'll
yeah,
go
for
off on
sure.
a couple tangents. But the Akash to me is one of the elements, one of the many elements that we live in and with. It's the element of ether. That's the translation from the Sanskrit word Akash. And it's also trickles down into multiple languages like Gujarati, my mother tongue, Hindi, where Akash means sky. And
Mm,
so it's almost as if it represents that great wonder, that which exists but isn't known. So it's a lot about the accepting of the unknown. My relationship with it goes back to my fascination with Sanskrit and that being, one of the oldest languages in the world and the basis of many Indian languages. Sanskrit being the language that the four Vedas were written in by Ved Vyas.
yes.
Now, Ved Vyas, when he wrote these, divined them and had gone into the Akash to divine these and write them out in Sanskrit. He's also written the Mahabharata, which is the greatest epic of India. And one of the sections in the Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita, which is when Lord Krishna speaks to Arjuna on the battlefield on a chariot and describes to him what's most important ethically when you are asked to live your dharma being the way of life, the righteous way of being. And for Hindus, that is what we practice, dharma. It doesn't translate as religion. And so it's more of a way of life.
Mm,
And because it's a way of life and almost the core tenet of that is Sanatan, which means eternal. Sanatan Dharma is the eternal existence, that which has no beginning and no end. And as a concept for time dilation, especially when we're looking at physics, time dilates differently at different places in the omniverse. Time is different if you're living on Saturn versus the Earth. A year in Haumea would be very different to a year in on Earth. And so, with the time dilation and this potential of looping time, if you're out of this loop, if you're out of this cycle, if you're out of this season, then all of a sudden you have access to something that is eternal, very much like Sanatan. So the Akash is the unknown, that which pervades all. And in the Vedas, written by Vedyas, who was instructed by the Akash, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about what that means to be instructed by the Akash, that once he'd written these became very much the core tenets of Hinduism that we have today. A lot of the mantras that we may hear, Om, all of the Sanskrit terminology is a very specific cymatic. The cymatic is a sacred geometric symbol created by sound. So really at the core of sound is crystal and light energy, just like light passes from one place to another. And based on that, playing between light and sound, there is the capacity for consciousness, some level of conscious thought, behavior in the density that we live in. And there are very, very many dimensions. And if you think about a dog being able to hear very specific sounds that humans can't,
Right.
you could almost say that the dog exists in a different dimension to us when it comes to sound. So because we can't experience something, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
And that is a really good point, because that's something that I've spoken about myself before, is that, like when you think of a dog whistle, the dog can hear it, we can't hear it. And it just tells you about, in the physical realm, that we actually have a very narrow spectrum of senses relative to the whole. So just because you can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Just because you can't hear something doesn't mean it isn't there. The whole thing goes through all our senses. And I find that quite fascinating. One thing that it came to me as you were talking there as well is about time, right? Now, time in a linear physical existence, right? We have a beginning, we have an end. That's how we understand life. Yet once you go beyond the physical realm, time is different. Is that how you see it?
Mm. When you move from a dimension to another, the relationship with the different dimensions changes. So, for example, you may have time and the physical density, but then as soon as you go into space, you've got another element. And so the dimensional evolution changes the experience that you're in, because there are other factors that are now playing a part in the existence of that, whatever it is that exists in that dimension. So to give you an example of that, often when we're experiencing something, and I'll just use the senses. Let's say you're sitting on your chair right now, you close your eyes and you say, I want to feel what this chair feels like. So all the touch points of the chair that you're sitting on with your body, I want to feel the sensation of that. And then whilst you still got your eyes closed, just imagine that you want to feel air, the air that surrounds you. And it's all here, just because you don't see it, but it's still there. And the way that you experience that is by breathing in. So you breathe in and you can feel the air coming up through your nostrils, and the sensation is very subtle, but still there. Whilst at the same time, you're paying attention to the experience of being on the chair. So there's a tactile touch and the touch on your nose from the air. And then it might be that you open up your ears and you ask yourself, at the same time that I'm doing these two, which is to breathe and feel air, to touch the seat, I also want to hear what's going on. So by doing that, you might just be hearing my voice. But as soon as you start to expand by asking, and what's beyond that sound? And what's beyond that sound? You can go anything from local to incredibly far away. There could be an aeroplane, there could be a dog barking, there could be the kettle's on. So by expanding your senses, you're able to have a very different experience. And by combining them individually to one another, you've got permutations there of the experience that you're then becoming aware of. So the element of time is very similar to that. The more you become aware of, your relationship with time changes. It could be that you're sitting and you're feeling paranoid, and every 3 seconds you ask the same question, what time is it? Because for you, potentially time might be going faster than somebody else that is meditating and has been meditating for 9 hours. And so time, especially in the Akash, is really fascinating, because on the Akashic aspect of our relationship to that which is, there are, one calls them records, but effectively, it's all that is. Some Akashic readers see it as a library, and I've seen that too. They're like records.
Yes.
And you can just pick out this. It's kind of like there's a thing on the Apple that is called Time Machine Backup. And then when you see the Time Machine Backup, you see all the various backups. and they're time related, date related, all stored correctly. And so I've seen that actually when I was doing some work on a colleague's heart, that I could see this entire record of all of these different moments in that person's life where it had engaged. It's like a log that had been created every single time something shifted and changed. Very similar to the way that a computer logs certain behaviors. Oh, you signed in then. Oh, you signed in again. So there's a log of an activity. And so imagine that every activity for a physical space or anything that exists has these logs. You can call them records, you can call them logs, you can just call them that which is. And there are different ways of accessing that. You might do that through creative. You might access that by going for a walk. You might access that by touching it. And so, depending on how sensitive these human senses of touch, of hearing, of sound, taste, all of these senses, when heightened, start to go beyond what is that which you see and can touch and is like visible, all the way to that which is unseen. So even if you were to close your eyes and daydream, you'd still be seeing things. And so the way that a lot of Western society has used this bridge between that which can and cannot be seen is imagination.
Yes.
Accessing the imagination will give you access to something other. And actually, it's under this imagination that dreams, daydreams, and meditation is sometimes put under. But that's a very naive way of seeing intuition. It's a cute way of seeing it, that, you know, I can imagine something in my mind. How do I know that I'm not just imagining it? But the moment that you start living in that space, you realize that imagination is just the first step. It's like when somebody asks you to activate a part of your brain. When I ask you a question, remember a time that you felt sad. Can you describe it to me? And anybody that's learning about micro expressions will look for where your eyes point to. And depending on where they point, you're either imagining it or lying potentially, or that you're accessing a particular memory. And then depending on where it is in the brain, your eyes will go to that particular place. There's some scientific evidence of that happening as well. In the Akashic,
I always tend to look, for some reason, I always tend to look upwards. So
look up.
there's something going on.
You know, I wonder what's going on over there. You might be accessing your neocortex. Like, there are so many signs that you can have a look at that will give you that information. So when you're accessing that intuition, you're going into and bridging that which is that you see, that you can touch, all the way to the more heightened, subtle senses that even if somebody is to think of you, you will know who it is that is thinking of you. You might message them. And so it goes from density, physical, that which you can touch, all the way to super sensitive, subtle sensations. Now, the more you train your senses, and what I mean by that is, like we had the example of hearing. You could have local hearing where I can hear the washing machine going off, all the way to a plane in the far distance. Where what you're doing during that time is you're taking your sense of hearing and you're expanding it like this. So the edges of your hearing get broader and wider, right? So you're touching even more and expanding. And as you do that, it's very easy to understand when you are asking yourself about sound, because you can locate that it's even further away. So think of the distance that you travel from local to the furthest that your ears can hear, and then identify with the sense of sound, right? Like your hearing, sense of hearing, and how much more subtle and refined that sense needs to be to hear a really faint sound that's there.
That kind of makes me think. I think this was in Eckhart Tolle's New Earth. He was recounting a story about a monk who was with the master and, you know, walking across the mountains. But it was about finding samadhi. The monk was kind of really trying to get there. The master was already understood these things. And so he said, Master, how do I find samadhi? The master ultimately said to him, says, can you hear the mountain stream? Mm-hmm. And he's listening and he can't hear it. And then he just focuses and concentrates and concentrates. Then finally, in the very far distance, he hears the mountain stream. He says, I can hear it. He says, that is samadhi. It's that broadening of the senses, right?
So the more subtle your capability, the wider your capability to understand and appreciate that which is. And so there comes a time where your senses have pushed really to the edge, where there's no human possibility that you should be able to hear that. You know, let's say I'm sitting here in Miami and I want to hear the mountain stream in the Himalayas. Is that possible? Or I'm sitting over here and I'm thinking about my mom in the UK. Is it possible to have this communication? And so then what happens is you go beyond the subtle sense, that which is really fine-tuned by your subtle awareness, and then you start going into an etheric sense.
And that's an interesting point, because this is something like, even with the military these days, they have teams of remote viewers who are able to go somewhere else in the world mentally. They may be in San Francisco. I know they had a team in San Francisco back in the 60s even, who would remote view into different parts of the world, into sort of like Russian territory or Chinese territory or whatever, and be able to ascertain what was happening and how. And the military obviously took this seriously, because you wouldn't have had teams of these very talented people who obviously had heightened senses and the ability to tap into these things. But it just shows that, our programming kind of takes us away from believing that is possible. However, clearly examples like this, your experiences in life tell us that really this is something that is absolutely, it's attainable. And it kind of opens up your mind once you start to get this and realize. One question I was going to ask you, one of the authors that I've studied a great deal is Dolores Cannon. And a lot of the times when she was going through the regression therapy with her clients, some of them on a number of occasions were taken to what they called a tapestry room, which the tapestry was the tapestry of all that is. Everything, like all our lives have a thread within this tapestry. And as the whole thing happens, this is constantly updated, but it's all that ever has been. Have you heard of the tapestry room type of example?
Not specifically those words, but I would say that when accessing the Akashic, that's kind of what happens. The another thing that came up just now is that, often we see our human form, and where we kind of put a shape around the human form, head, neck, arms, torso, legs. But that doesn't include everything of you. So if you think about it this way, my arm, I'm alive, I'm conscious, and my body has heat. So the heat dissipates into the atmosphere around me. And when the heat enters the atmosphere, would you say that that's still me? Because I don't think I end there.
No.
I don't end at my skin.
Right.
The heat dissipates. It's like my breath. My breath comes out. Am I all of this area around me that I've just breathed into?
Mm-hmm.
So the relationship with space proprioceptively, like this area around me, is not defined, and therefore you cannot confine a human being.
No.
Like the remote sensors, the remote analyses that were done through the CIA Gateway project of extrasensory perception. At the time, they would geolocate to a physical space and would be able to observe codes things that people could see. It's almost akin to being able to see through somebody else's eyes.
Mm-hmm.
That they would be able to geolocate into this room and identify what's actually happening. Very much like a clairsentient, where they
Right.
might touch something that belongs to someone who's just died, and they'll just get a download of everything that happened. I call it kind of like an airdrop. That's what it feels like, an
That's true,
Apple
yeah.
phone airdrop. You just get this information that comes in, and yes, of course, you'll sit there and wonder, is that real? Did I just make that up? And I think it's the pollution of thinking of it just as imagination that displaces intuition.
That's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because this psychometry thing, as they call it, right? Which is the energy held in, like this pen, for instance, right? Does this pen carry energy? Does it? Well, it exists. It's there, but items carry the energy of the people, say, for instance, that have experienced it, correct? And that's kind of how sort of psychic mediums, for instance, might help the police with their inquiries in a way, right? If there's a missing person and they get an item, then they can reach out, a bit like we talk about the remote viewers, right? There's an ability to make connections and to see things depending on the level of talent of the individual, because I think that we all have strengths and things that we're supposed to do, because those strengths are the reason we're here on the planet right now. Now, clearly, you've got an array of talents, and the Akash is one that is something that I presume you do journeying on behalf of people to the Akash.
So just a quick one. I don't think that this is a talent, that
Okay.
the particular skill that you learn over time and effort. It's like picking up a knife and cutting a toast. If you've never held a knife, you could say someone who holds a knife well is talented. But as we know, holding a knife isn't a big deal, and that everyone can pick up a knife over time and get to be precise with what they're cutting. So the Akash is very similar to that. It's not specifically a talent or a particular special or superhuman skill. Everybody has it. Like you have the ability to use your senses in whichever way they have been gifted to you. It might be that I don't see and that I'm visually impaired, but the cortex that would normally use the sense of sight would be used for something else. So it's a heightened sense of intuition and visual cortex, but not using the regular, version of it. So coming back to your question, the relationship between myself and another, again, is questionable. If I hold the hand of another human being, the union between myself and that person is a physical union of touch. If, however, they have emotions for me, is that still a union? If they have a thought for me, is that not a union? Again, going to that physical sensation all the way to thought and subtle vibrations. Somebody is in the room, let's say you're at the bar and you're having a drink and you're sitting there, and then all of a sudden you just get this ping from the back over here. It's like the sixth sense. And you turn around and you see that someone's looking straight at you. What's that? If not a union? And so when you're journeying, they're journeying too, because it's a union. Of course, in the Akashic, if you're able to see certain things, the best form of action is to ask consent. To ask consent before you go into someone's records. I like to do that. You may or may not, but I like to do that because it involves another person.
Yes.
And with their consent, you do the journeying together. Yes. Now, they may think that you've got superhuman skills, which I personally don't think the Akash and access to the Akash is anything other than the ability for a human to smell.
Mhm.
Everyone has it. So in this relationship of the union between one and another, and it could be one to many, one to the universe, in that relationship, we're able to identify what's important at that minute. And you've got to move yourself out of the way, your thoughts out of the way, your judgments and challenges out of the way, your opportunities out of the way, so that you can allow for this intuitive space to open up. If you've taken over the room, there's no space for anyone else. So it's a very cute capability to move yourself out of the way, like deep listening. When you're deep listening, you're not thinking about what you're going to say in response. You're too busy listening. And in the same way, you're deep listening to these subtle energies, sensations, information, airdrops, and you move yourself out of the way without involving yourself in that process, unless if you need to.
So, making the Akash yours, how would you advise people to explore this?
I believe there are 3 steps. The first is to enhance your senses, and you enhance them by practicing them. The second is gratitude, and I'll talk about enhancements of senses and gratitude in a second. The third one is being open. So when you enhance your senses, the same way that I was describing how to expand your sense of hearing, right? From local to like global even. You do that by practicing it every day, like you would meditation, like you would go for a walk, like you would cut a piece of toast to get better at it. So that's a skill over time. Sometimes you'll get more information very quickly. Other times there may be some other influences. Maybe you had some coffee that didn't quite go down so well. Maybe you had an argument, you're too emotional. Perhaps, something hit your leg, and so now you're thinking about the pain in your body. So many things can influence you there, but enhancing these subtle senses and etheric senses is one way to do it. The second that I mentioned really goes into, I personally think, being conscious of why you want to do this, because anyone and everyone can learn a skill, but you want to know why you want to do it. And then you open up that space without the judgment. Oh, it's wrong. Oh, it's right. I'm seeing a stick. What does the stick have to do with this? Or I'm seeing a whale, and like the whale's talking to me, but it's not moving its mouth and it doesn't speak English. What's going on? When you start judging it, you start to disperse the energy that was coming to see you, because now you want it in a very specific form. It's like something is communicating to you, and you say, I just want ones and zeros, but it doesn't communicate that way. So you are putting restraints on the way that it communicates with you. So being open means not being judgmental or living within a box of that which it should be, right? And if it doesn't exist that way, you won't accept it. The gratitude piece, coming back to that, why you want to do it. I learned very early on that as you expand the frequency of your heart and tune your body, toning is one way of doing it, two-tone chanting, just chanting, sound allows you to open up and clear the space. It's incredible. It's like listening to music when you're in a bad mood. What does it do? It gets you in a good mood. So you can change the way that you feel, and feeling and sensations are really important in the Akash, because information will come to you and you need to know how it comes to you. So the information can come to you as a visual, it can come to you as sound, it can come to you as a sensation or a cognizance. And in any of these aspects, see again, the clairvoyant senses are the etheric senses. Because as soon as you step out of the normal things that you think you can do, you're then able to expand that out. And these etheric senses, after the subtle, are the ones that you start training up. So gratitude, the more grateful that you are for the most simplest and smallest of things, the more your capacity to appreciate that which is happening at that moment. And the stronger your appreciation for something, the less the judgment. Because you're so grateful that there's this ancestor that's walked into the Akashic room for you, and you're conversing with them and they're telling you something. It's also a form of protection, because you're stepping into areas that are not so well known, not so well documented, not so well understood. And so to have appreciation for yourself so that you don't have that negation, doubt, and issues around identity, acceptance, and deep gratitude is what allows you to open up and to be comfortable with the information when it comes in without judging it.
I do love this stuff, and it's something that I've looked at along with so many other things, and I think I need to give these things more focus individually, because I know that it's there and it exists and it's there to be enjoyed. It's kind of what life's about, is this journey of exploration. So I know for a lot of people, this is not a subject matter that many of the mainstream will have covered particularly, but hopefully it'll just create the curiosity to dig a little bit deeper and realize that we're so much bigger than our programming believes us to be. There's so much out there just waiting for us. It just makes it so exciting,
I feel that a lot.
Well, thank you, Tia. I appreciate you being on our first ever live event, albeit this was pre-recorded, but yay, the first one.
So grateful and so happy and so excited for all of your viewers to learn more about these different topics and to dive deeper if they're curious about them and get creative with different ways that they can use them. We have a channel on unite.live, and it's called Goddess Oracle. So all of the recordings that Jolie and myself do are put directly onto this platform and people can view them. We normally do them and we release them every Sunday. So there will be one tomorrow that's alive. And it just gives us the opportunity to really explore what the Akashic is with the different skills that Jolie and myself have learned over time. And there are so many questions about the Akash, and there are different ways, different cultures to access it in ways that I don't even know yet. That's not to say that I'm right or wrong. It's just that I just want to get curious about it. So if you're curious in the audience about learning more, then you can always go to our Instagram page. It's called Goddess Oracle 1111, and learn a little bit more about what's happening and how you're feeling and what the sensations are and what your journey is. Because often if we are getting nudges that there's something else there, often we nip it in the bud, and it's a shame that we don't explore it.
I'm grateful that you and Jolie got together a few years ago, whenever that was. And I'm glad that I got together with Jolie as well. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here right now. But saying that, I'm going to leave you to get on with the day in Miami. So have a fantastic rest of your day, Tia. And thank you again. And thank you to the Elevated Planet community for tuning in. If you have any questions for Tia or for myself, then you can also drop them through onto elevatedplanet.life, and there's a communication page there, and we would welcome your thoughts and questions.